Is it still worth buying the iPhone XS Max in 2020? The short answer is yes. As we all know, every single year Apple releases new iPhones, and with this period of releasing new iPhones, people start to consider upgrading themselves. And I often get asked a lot, is it worth me upgrading now when I have this phone which only came out last year or the year before, to a newer iPhone which costs over £1,000 or around that price point? And I always have the same answer. It all depends on the kind of person and user you are with your phone. If you are someone who's really into technology, then you probably want to buy the newest, latest, greatest thing every single year. Of course, this can be very expensive and you need to really love it and really want that new thing to actually spend that much money on it. So if you're just an average user, then these phones may really not be for you. You may be spending way too much for these phones not to get the best use out of them. If you're someone who just uses your phone very casually, use it for light social media browsing or use it to take photos every now and then realistically no. As it stands right now, iPhones are already a lot more powerful than people can actually use. And what I mean by this is the processing power inside the iPhones that are coming out now cannot be properly utilised for the next 3 or 4 years. The A12 processor is still a fantastically powerful processor that a lot of people will not actually fully utilise themselves. Now, this processor still outperforms the Qualcomm 855, which is found in phones like the OnePlus 7T Pro, for instance. I've been using an iPhone XS Max now for about 2 years, and honestly, I haven't noticed it slow down a single bit. The processor still works absolutely perfectly. I can still browse and do everything I want to do on my phone at reasonable speeds, and I haven't ever noticed it once glitch. So really, personally, I don't need to buy a new iPhone, or I don't think I do anyway. But, of course, I'm someone who's really interested in technology, and that is my interest, so I do want to buy the latest things. Now, of course, that's personal circumstance, that's just because it's my interest, but for the everyday user, you're really not going to notice that much difference from, let's say, the iPhone XS Max to the iPhone 11. The first important thing to consider if you are looking to upgrade your phone is the budget you have to spend on a new phone. A lot of the new flagship phones are over £1,000, which is quite a scary price and can put a lot of people off. Of course, it's really nice to have the fastest processors, the biggest batteries, and the best screens, but what you really need to ask yourself is it worth my £1,000 or £1,000+ spending that much money on this when I could spend half of that and get a phone that will suit me just right? For a lot of people, these really expensive flagship phones aren't always accessible to them, which is why companies now are making these cheaper phones with slightly less components inside them just to drive the price down a bit so they can be accessed by people who can't afford the flagships. The latest phone we saw, for instance, from Apple was the iPhone SE version 2, which sits at £419 in the UK or $399. The iPhone SE features the A13 processor from Apple, which is the latest and greatest silicon they're currently putting inside their phones. So to have that processing power inside a phone that's sub $400 is actually incredible. It's very understandable when phones like the SE are so popular because they do have fantastic spec and they're at a price point which really isn't that scary. So it means that a lot of people can afford them and they can use them. Of course, for a lot of people, the actual aesthetic of a phone isn't that important, and just having a phone that is capable enough to do the things that you want to do is enough. But I know a lot of people who do really want these edge-to-edge displays, and they do really want a nice viewing experience and a nice user experience that does feel, modern. Which is why I think the iPhone XS Max is a fantastic choice for those who are considering upgrading from a phone. Let's say you've got an iPhone 6 or you've had an iPhone 6 for years now, and you're considering upgrading to a new phone. Now, if you can afford it and you want the flagship, of course, buy the flagship. I'm not saying you shouldn't buy a flagship phone, they're fantastic. But if you are someone who's on a tighter budget, then it really is worth considering slightly older flagships. The iPhone XS Max is currently sitting at £450 to £700 depending on the capacity and the condition. A really important thing to consider with buying an iPhone is just how long they last you. A lot of people have this misconception that phones only last 2 years and then they're useless, they don't work anymore, but that really isn't the case, especially with iPhones. Now, I've been using iPhones for many, many years and I've never really hit a point where I thought I need to upgrade. It's only a want, it's not a need. I've really put this down to Apple's fantastic integration between the hardware and the software. One thing I can really commend Apple on is how they're continuously releasing supports for older iPhones. So even those people who do have iPhone 6s or iPhone 7s are still getting the latest OS upgrades, which means that they can still use it just like you can a newer phone. Of course, the newest operating systems will not be as optimized for the older phones as they are the newest phones, but they do still work perfectly fine. Some kind of wear and tear can't be avoided on older phones, like the wear of the batteries. This isn't specific to Apple. Every single lithium-ion battery in the world degrades over time and it can't hold as much charge as it once could. I could go into a lot of detail about things like processing power, RAM, storage, memory, all this stuff, but really for the general user, this stuff doesn't really make much of a difference when you have an iPhone. Now, on paper, iPhones do not compare well to Android phones in terms of their physical spec. I personally find it quite difficult to compare Android phones with iPhones because of how Apple designed the operating system and the hardware to be as optimized for each other as possible. This is something that Android phones cannot do the same way that Apple can, because Android phones do not own the operating system they use. Of course, Android phones do have fantastic specs on paper. They've got loads of RAM, they've got really great processors, they've got all this really good stuff going for them, but really this cannot be utilized in the operating systems they use. And that's because they cannot fully optimize the hardware for the software. Companies like Samsung and OnePlus are able to optimize Android in some ways for their phones. These optimizations can never be on the same level as the optimization you see with iPhones. In general, if you are on a bit of a budget, but you still want a really good phone, then yes, you should consider buying an iPhone XS, XS Max, or even an iPhone 10 for that matter, because you'll still get the full use out of it and you have many years of use to come. These are fantastic phones that will still get continuous support from Apple for the coming years, so you really shouldn't worry about that phone lasting you a long time if that's your concern. Personally, I will be upgrading my phone when the new iPhone 12 Pro Max comes out, but this is mainly because it is my primary interest and it's something that I do care a lot about. So for me, I can get the use out of it, but I do believe that the average person or someone that isn't into tech won't see the full benefits like I would. I think if you're on a tighter budget and you still want a really great phone that will last you a very long time, then yes, you should consider buying older flagship phones from Apple or even some flagship phones from Android as well. Thanks for watching, and I really hope this cleared up some stuff for you. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe and leave a comment down below. Thanks.